Okay, 12. You're about to enter into a study of a significant Islamic person or school of thought. At Gilroy, we study a gentleman by the name of Sayyid Qtub. Sayyid Qtub was an Egyptian intellectual who was born in 1906 and died in 1966. Now, before studying Sayyid, even though it is, and his contribution and his impact, before studying his contribution and his impact, it is essential that you understand the social and historical context of Egypt, both before Sayyid and Sayyid Qutb's Egypt. What was Egypt like, both on a global scale, and what was going on domestically in Egypt at the time of Sayyid and before him. This is not specifically part of your syllabus, okay? There is no dot point that says, explains or describes the social and historical context of Sayyid. However, it'd be very amiss to just say, oh, by the way, he was part of this group, without understanding, okay, who were that group and where did they come from and why was there a need for them. Hopefully this video tutorial will help explain some of that. You don't have to write any of this down. I particularly told my class they don't have to write any of it down, but hopefully it will frame our study of Sayyid so you can better understand his motivations and his contributions. So Sayyid Qutb has to be studied within the social and political context of his time. It is essential. If you take Sayyid out of the social and political context of his time, it can get very misjudged, okay? So we're going to start a long time before 1906, okay? We're actually going to start around before the 18th century. So let's have a look at Egypt and where Sayyid was from. So this is Egypt over here, okay? This is where Sayyid Qutb was born and spent the majority of his life. So you can see Egypt is placed really interesting in an really interesting position in relation to the rest of that kind of region. I mean, you've got the Mediterranean Sea here, and even though it's cut off on this map, you've got kind of Europe up here, Africa over here, the Middle East over here, and you've got Egypt hanging around in the middle. If I was to show you further on the map, if you go down here, you've got the Indian Ocean in India. So you've got this region that is kind of smack bang in the middle of this pretty much everything. And Egypt has been tainted with a very interesting history of occupation. I'm not going to go back too far, but we will start back a little bit. Egypt was part of the Ottoman Empire, so this is pre-18th century. Egypt, so pre-1700s, Egypt was part of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was a Turkish empire, and if you see here on the diagram from like the late 1500s, here is what most of you guys just saw as the Middle East over here. Here is what we now kind of recognize as Europe, and down here is where Egypt is. So Egypt was part of the Ottoman Empire or the Turkish Empire. As a result of being part of the Turkish Empire, the state religion of the Ottoman Empire was Islam, okay, a Sunni Islam. So Egypt has and was been quite a heavy Islamic country since that time. In 1798, Egypt was invaded by the French, okay, by this man in particular, Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, if just on a quick side note, there was a great struggle between the French and the British at that time. France invaded Egypt in the hopes that it would cut off British communications with India, okay? So India was part of the British Empire, and it was probably one of its most valuable kind of conquests, or as I've said here, one of its most valuable colonial holdings, or India was basically its most valuable colony. Let me show you on a map. Okay, here we go. Sorry, that just took a second to get up. Okay, so here's on the map. Now, why would it be... Oh, sorry, I'll make it a little bit smaller. Why would Egypt be important? Well, okay, Britain is up here, the United Kingdom, okay? It's in there. India, sorry, I keep on moving this map. India is in over here, okay? France is here. Right, now, communication lines. See how we could go very easily through Egypt to get to India. If you didn't go through Egypt, your only other option was going all the way down, and you can't see at the bottom of the map, down Africa and along to here. So in an attempt to defeat the British, okay, Napoleon decided to invade Egypt, and if he had control over Egypt, he had control over communications, particularly between Britain and India, and therefore he had control over Britain, or he had the upper hand over Britain. Now, I mean, the occupation of France didn't actually last long because of whole lots of other wars. Their army became very, very weak, and Napoleon actually ended up retreating from Egypt in only about 2 years later, in the early 1800s, late 1799. There was much bloodshed, and the Egyptian population did suffer a lot of casualties, okay? But Napoleon did end up retreating. So after Napoleon, from 1805 to 1848, Egypt was ruled by another Ottoman, okay? A gentleman by the name of Muhammad Ali, this guy over here. Muhammad Ali was a really interesting individual. He tried to modernize Egypt, so Egypt hadn't really been modernized too much under the Ottoman Empire, and Napoleon hadn't done really too much in the 2 years he was there. But Muhammad Ali built a new army, redistributed wealth over Egypt. He started a whole lot more public works and machinery. He really did try to bring Egypt into the modern century. Now, Muhammad Ali is considered, therefore, kind of the father of modern Egypt. Shortly after Muhammad Ali's reign, the Suez Canal was opened in 1869. Now, the Suez Canal is an incredibly important thing to understand. The Suez Canal runs through the middle of Egypt. It is a very small canal, artificially made. Now, the Suez Canal is important for many reasons. Basically, it allowed ships to travel between Europe and Southeast Asia without having to navigate through Africa. So without having to go through that big loop that I showed you before. It's a very narrow, as you can see in the diagram, very narrow passageway, but it reduced sea voyage between Europe and India by about 7,000 kilometers. And in terms of logistics, it is an incredibly important logistical passageway. Now, the Suez Canal has consequently caused some of the biggest drama in the region since then. And that was 1869 when it was opened. In 1975, it wasn't all sunshine and lollipops. As a result of Muhammad Ali's modernization plans for Egypt and all the money that he pumped into public works, it actually ended up bankrupting the country, and it led to a foreign debt administration in 1875. So the country was in a very, very, very big financial crisis, and Egypt became incredibly vulnerable. In 1881, the Egyptian army actually ended up taking control. So originally we started with this kind of very Islamic country. Then we had the first kind of invasion from Napoleon that shook about and kind of rattled up society. Then we had the father of modern Egypt come in with this modernization plan that ended up crashing the country. So Egypt as a society was very, very vulnerable. But it had this canal. It had this incredibly powerful passageway that held much political and social weight. 1882, here's a picture of what the Suez Canal looks like. It is very, very small, as you can see. It runs through like that. As a result of the Suez Canal, Britain actually invaded Egypt in 1882 and took occupancy in order to protect and control and maintain the Suez Canal as a shipping route. If you controlled Egypt, you controlled the Suez Canal. And Britain wasn't actually concerned with who was in charge or who ran it. All they were concerned with is, if I'm in control, I can protect British investment and I can maintain this small passageway. So yeah, that was in 1882, a year after the Egyptian army took control, that Britain actually invaded Egypt when it was at its weakest. It's important to note at this point, since Napoleon in 1798, all control of Egypt was, and all political powers were quite secular. So everything past Napoleon, including Muhammad Ali and including now Britain, they've been really, really secular. There've been no real focus on religion or on particularly or any really Islamic leaders. While Muhammad Ali was Islamic, there was not a real focus on it. So in 1928, a gentleman by the name of Hassan al-Banna, this gentleman over here, founded a group called the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, the aim of the Muslim Brotherhood, they were an organization that called kind of for the restoration of Islamic principles, and a return to the Quran and a return to the basic pillars and the four pillars of Islam. So in a society that was once Islamic, that had been almost destroyed and belittled by whole lots of secular regimes, Hassan and the Islamic Brotherhood were calling for a back to the almost like the grassroots of who Egypt was and where it was. The Brotherhood ended up establishing clinics and schools and mosques and work opportunities for the Egyptian people as a way that it kind of encouraged them to go back to this almost pious life. By 1948 and 1949, I mean, it's important to note the British were still occupying Egypt at this time. By 1948 and 1949, the Muslim Brotherhood became almost like an advocate or a flag bearer for the grievances against the British influence and the failure of those secular regimes. They became the people who were, yes, we're standing up against these oppressive regimes that have failed our society. In December 1948, the Prime Minister of Egypt at the time, Mahmoud and I always pronounce this wrong and I apologise, Mahmoud and Nukrasi Pasha, dismantled the Muslim Brotherhood and sent many of its members to jail and seized its assets. This was basically due to the fact that there was a lot of escalated conflict between the Muslim Brotherhood that now had gained quite a wide following of very different groups of people had joined the Muslim Brotherhood, and it had actually turned into something a little bit different to its previously established objectives. But it was due to this escalated conflict and the fears that the Islamic Brotherhood kind of proposed a challenge against the government at the time. And they were very, very popular, the Muslim Brotherhood. So the Prime Minister, Mahmoud, sent them all to jail. Now, I don't know if you've noticed up until now, Sayyid, a reminder, was from 1906 to 1966. So Sayyid was around at the time where Hassan formed the Muslim Brotherhood. Sayyid was in his early 20s, and by 1948 he was part of the Muslim Brotherhood and actually was one of the men who got sent to jail by Prime Minister Mahmoud. 3 weeks after dismantling the Muslim Brotherhood, the Prime Minister Mahmoud was actually assassinated by a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. You can tell that this has escalated quite quickly, and the original founder, Hassan al-Banna, immediately issued a statement saying, no, he should not have been assassinated. It was wrong. It goes against the ideals of the original ideals of the Muslim Brotherhood. However, in February 1949, Hassan al-Banna was actually assassinated himself. So, as you can see, it is a really interesting climate that came both before Sayyid and during his time. I'm not going to go any further than there, because I mean the main point that we study Sayyid up until is his eventual imprisonment, which was not long after this. But that is the Egypt that Sayyid was growing up in. That is the Egypt that came before Sayyid Qtub. And there is a really interesting story that comes after him. However, you must understand when studying Sayyid, that is where he was from. That is the context of which his writings come out of, his statements come out of, milestones comes out of, his involvement in these groups come out of. You must understand the context in which he has come from in order to understand him as a person. So hopefully that will give you a good base for understanding and studying Sayyid when we start to look at his contributions and his impact on Islam.